Bob loved his pool. Not just a little bit, but a whole, splashing, cannonball-jumping lot. It wasn't the biggest pool, just a regular-sized rectangle in his backyard, but to Bob, it was an ocean. On hot summer days, you could find him doing the backstroke, pretending he was a sleek dolphin. On cooler days, he'd be inventing new diving games, seeing how many colorful pool noodles he could grab in one breath. Sometimes, he'd just float on his back, watching the clouds drift by, imagining they were giant, fluffy sheep. Bob wasn't always a pool person. He used to be more of an indoorsy type, happy with a good book and a glass of lemonade. But when he and his wife, Mary, bought their house, the pool was a major selling point. Mary loved to sunbathe beside it, and Bob quickly discovered the joy of a refreshing dip after a long day at work. He worked at a computer company, so cooling off in the water was the perfect way to unwind. He treated that pool like his second home. He kept it sparkling clean, skimming leaves every morning and vacuuming the bottom at least twice a week. He even bought a little robot that scrubbed the sides automatically. He knew the chlorine levels by heart, and always made sure the water was perfectly balanced. Bob took pride in his pool. He'd even added some fun touches, like underwater lights that changed color and a little floating speaker that played his favorite tunes. Sometimes, he'd invite his friends over for pool parties, complete with burgers on the grill and silly games. He was known for his legendary cannonballs, which always managed to soak everyone nearby. His dog, a golden retriever named Goldie, loved the pool too, though she wasn't allowed to swim in it. Goldie would sit at the edge, tail wagging furiously, watching Bob splash around. Sometimes, he'd spray her with a gentle stream of water, and she'd bark with delight. Bob's pool was his happy place. It was a place to relax, to have fun, and to escape the everyday stresses of life. He couldn't imagine life without it. He looked forward to many more summers spent swimming, splashing, and making memories in his beloved backyard oasis. He really felt like he was living the dream, the American dream. A house, a dog, a loving wife and a pool. What else could a man want? That was, until the letters started showing up. Official-looking letters, with the stern, unwavering logo of the Harmony Glade Homeowners Association plastered across the top. Those letters, they were from the HOA. Now, an HOA, or Homeowners Association, is kind of like a club for people who live in the same neighborhood. Everyone who owns a house in Harmony Glade is automatically a member, whether they want to be or not. And like any club, the HOA has rules. Lots and lots of rules. The idea behind the HOA is to keep the neighborhood looking nice and to make sure everyone follows certain standards. Things like keeping your grass cut, painting your house in approved colors, and not parking your car on the street overnight. Most of the time, Bob didn't mind the rules. He understood the need for some order, and he appreciated that Harmony Glade was a well-maintained and attractive place to live. It helped keep property values high, Mary always said. But Bob's HOA wasn't just about the basics. Oh no. They had rules about everything. Rules about the height of your hedges, the type of mailbox you could have, and even the color of your Christmas lights. And of course, they had a whole section of rules dedicated to the pool. Bob had skimmed through the pool rules when they first moved in, but he hadn't paid much attention. He figured as long as he kept the pool clean and didn't throw wild parties, he'd be fine. He was wrong. The Harmony Glade HOA pool rules were legendary. They were printed in a booklet thicker than a dictionary, filled with clauses and subclauses and amendments that seemed designed to make swimming as joyless as possible. There were rules about the size and type of flotation devices allowed, the hours you could swim, no swimming after dusk, and even the acceptable level of splashing. Bob remembered one particularly absurd rule that stated, excessive splashing, defined as water exiting the pool perimeter, is strictly prohibited. Seriously? How could you swim without splashing a little? He thought it was ridiculous, but he brushed it off, thinking it was just a formality, something they never actually enforced. He was wrong about that, too. Very wrong. The HOA was run by a committee of neighborhood volunteers, mostly retirees with a lot of time on their hands. They took their jobs very seriously, patrolling the neighborhood in golf carts, armed with clipboards and measuring tapes, ready to pounce on any infraction, no matter how small. Mrs. Higgins, a woman with a permanent frown and a keen eye for rule-breaking, was the self-appointed head of the pool patrol. She lived across the street from Bob, and he often saw her peering over the fence, her lips pursed in disapproval. He'd wave politely, but she'd just glare back, as if he were personally responsible for the decline of Western civilization. Bob was about to find out just how seriously Mrs. Higgins and the rest of the HOA took those pool rules. And his happy, splashing, cannonball-filled days were about to come to an abrupt and soggy end. The first letter was just a warning, a small yellow slip of paper that slipped ominously through his mail slot. It was a sign of things to come, a dark cloud on the horizon of his perfect pool life. The yellow slip was indeed a warning. Bob unfolded it with a sigh. The heading read, in bold, underlined letters, "Notice of Violation." Beneath that, in smaller, but equally officious-looking print, it stated the nature of the violation: excessive pool toys. Bob blinked. Excessive pool toys. He looked out at his pool. Scattered around the deck were a few colorful noodles, a couple of inflatable rafts shaped like cartoon characters, and a bright yellow beach ball. He didn't think it was that many. Certainly not excessive. The letter went on to explain that HOA Regulation 3:14 subsection B clearly stated that only 3 pool toys were permitted per household at any given time. Any additional toys would be considered a violation and subject to further action. Further action? What did that even mean? Bob rolled his eyes. This was ridiculous. 3 pool toys. Who came up with these rules? He had a sudden urge to gather all the members of the HOA committee and stage a giant pool party, complete with every inflatable swan and pizza slice raft he could find. He showed the letter to Mary when she got home from work. She read it, then burst out laughing. Seriously? They're complaining about the pool toys. I know. Bob said, throwing his hands up in exasperation. It's not like I have a giant inflatable dinosaur army taking over the yard. Mary chuckled. Well, you do have that inflatable unicorn. That thing is pretty big. Okay, 1 unicorn, Bob conceded. But still. 3 pool toys. It's absurd. Mary, ever the pragmatist, suggested he just comply with the rule. Just put some of the toys away, Bob. It's not worth fighting over. Bob knew she was right. He didn't want to cause trouble. He just wanted to enjoy his pool in peace. So, the next day, he reluctantly gathered up the extra pool toys and stuffed them into the garage. He left out 3 of the most essential items: a blue noodle, a small green raft, and the yellow beach ball. He thought that would be the end of it. He thought he had successfully appeased the HOA and could now go back to his happy, splashing life. But Mrs. Higgins, it seemed, was not so easily satisfied. She had her eye on Bob, and she was determined to find another reason to rain on his pool parade. Little did Bob know, the pool toy incident was just the beginning. The real trouble was about to start, and it involved something far more serious than inflatable unicorns and colorful noodles. It involved splashing. Excessive splashing. And it was going to cost him. Bob tried. He really tried. After the pool toy incident, he made a conscious effort to be a more rule-abiding swimmer. He read the entire pool rule booklet cover to cover, highlighting the most important, and ridiculous, regulations. He practiced entering the pool with minimal disturbance, sliding in like a stealthy ninja rather than his usual boisterous jump. He even attempted to modify his cannonball technique, trying to keep the splash contained within the pool's perimeter. It was not easy. But despite his best efforts, it wasn't enough. 2 weeks after the pool toy warning, another letter arrived. This one wasn't yellow. This one was a crisp, white, official-looking document, and it contained the dreaded word, fine. Bob's heart sank. He ripped open the envelope and scanned the letter. The violation? Excessive splashing, repeat offense. He couldn't believe it. He was being fined for splashing. He reread the letter, his anger rising with each line. The fine was $100. $100 for splashing. The letter cited specific dates and times when the excessive splashing had been observed, all conveniently logged by, you guessed it, Mrs. Higgins. One entry read, July 12, 3:15 p.m., subject engaged in repeated cannonball activity, resulting in significant water displacement and disturbance to neighboring properties. Bob remembered that day. His friend, Tom, had come over, and they had been having a friendly cannonball competition. He admitted, they had gotten a little carried away. But, disturbance to neighboring properties? That was a bit of an exaggeration. Another entry stated, July 15, 5 p.m., subject observed engaging in vigorous freestyle stroke, causing excessive splashing and potential water damage to surrounding landscaping. He had been swimming laps. He was trying to get some exercise. How could swimming be a violation? Bob was furious. This was beyond ridiculous. This was harassment. He felt like he was living in some kind of bizarre, rule-obsessed nightmare. He marched into the house and showed the letter to Mary. "They're fining me for splashing," he exclaimed, his voice rising in disbelief. $100. This is insane. Mary read the letter, her brow furrowed. Well, it does say, repeat offense. But it's splashing, Mary. Splashing. How can you swim without splashing? I don't know, Bob, she said, sighing. Maybe you should try swimming like a robot. Bob glared at her. This isn't funny, Mary. This is serious. They're trying to ruin my summer. He knew he had to do something. He couldn't just sit back and let the HOA bully him. He had to fight back. But how? He couldn't reason with them. He had tried to follow their rules, and it hadn't worked. He needed a new plan. A bold plan. A plan that would make them regret ever messing with Bob and his beloved pool. He just didn't know what that plan was yet. He paced back and forth, trying to think. He needed inspiration. He needed a duck. Bob felt a surge of anger, hotter than the summer sun beating down on his pool deck. This wasn't just about the money, although $100 was a lot to pay for splashing. It was about principle. It was about the freedom to enjoy his own property without being constantly scrutinized and penalized by a bunch of busybodies. He slammed his fist on the kitchen counter, making Mary jump. This is so unfair, he shouted. I pay my dues, I keep my yard clean, and I try to be a good neighbor. What more do they want? Mary put a calming hand on his arm. I know, honey, it's frustrating. But maybe we should just pay the fine and try to be more careful. More careful? Bob scoffed. How much more careful can I be? Am I supposed to just sit in the pool and not move? Am I supposed to swim like a statue? He started pacing again, his mind racing with possibilities. He could fight the fine. He could write a letter to the HOA, outlining all the reasons why their rules were ridiculous and their enforcement was unfair. He could even hire a lawyer and take them to court. He imagined himself standing before the HOA committee, delivering a passionate speech about the importance of freedom and the right to splash. He pictured Mrs. Higgins squirming in her seat, her face turning red with embarrassment. He fantasized about the entire neighborhood cheering him on, finally standing up to the tyranny of the HOA. But then reality set in. Fighting the HOA would be expensive and time-consuming. It could drag on for months, maybe even years. And even if he won, he'd probably just make enemies and create even more problems for himself. Maybe Mary was right. Maybe he should just pay the fine and try to avoid further conflict. But the thought of giving in to the HOA, of letting them dictate how he could use his own pool, made his blood boil. "I'm not going to pay it," he declared, his voice firm. "I'm not going to let them win." Mary looked at him with concern. "Bob, are you sure about this? It could get ugly." "I don't care," he said. "I'm not backing down. I'm going to fight back, but I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to find a way to make them regret ever sending me that fine." He stopped pacing and stared out the window at his pool, his mind still searching for a solution. He needed a plan that was both effective and unexpected. He needed a plan that would make the HOA look foolish and show them that they couldn't just push him around. He needed a plan that was ducky. Yes, a ducky plan was exactly what he needed. Now, how to make it happen? That was the million-dollar question. Or, in this case, the $100 question. The question that would determine the fate of Bob, his pool, and the Harmony Glade Homeowners Association. Bob stared at the pool, the clear blue water shimmering in the sunlight. He couldn't swim in it. Not without risking another ridiculous fine. Not without Mrs. Higgins peering over the fence, clipboard in hand, ready to pounce on the slightest infraction. So, what could he do with it? That's when the funny idea popped into his head. A truly, wonderfully absurd idea. If he couldn't use the pool for swimming, maybe he could use it for something else. Something completely unexpected. Something that would make the HOA's head spin. He grinned. The more he thought about it, the more brilliant it seemed. He pictured Mrs. Higgins' face when she saw what he was planning. He imagined the HOA committee scrambling to figure out how to deal with this new, unprecedented situation. He turned to Mary, who was watching him with a mixture of amusement and concern. "I have an idea," he said, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "A really, really good idea." Mary raised an eyebrow. "Oh. And what's that?" "If I can't swim in the pool," Bob said, pausing for dramatic effect, "then I'm going to turn it into a duck pond." Mary stared at him for a moment, then burst out laughing. "A duck pond? You're going to turn your pool into a duck pond? Bob, you're crazy." "Maybe," he said, grinning. "But it's a brilliant kind of crazy. Think about it, Mary. They can't fine me for splashing if there's no one swimming. And they can't complain about pool toys if there are only ducks." Mary shook her head, still laughing. "I can't believe you're serious." "I am totally serious," Bob said. "I'm going to transform this pool into the ultimate duck paradise. It'll be the envy of every duck in the county." He started pacing again, his mind already buzzing with plans. He'd need to clean the pool, of course. Make sure it was safe for ducks. He'd need to add some plants and rocks to make it more duck-friendly. And he'd need to find some ducks. "But Bob," Mary said, her laughter subsiding. "What about the HOA? They're not going to let you keep ducks in your pool." "That's where the fun begins," Bob said, his eyes gleaming. "I'm going to argue that ducks aren't covered by the pool rules. And I'm going to challenge them to find a rule that says I can't have a duck pond in my backyard." He grabbed his laptop and started researching ducks. He learned about different breeds, their diets, and their habitats. He discovered that ducks were actually quite intelligent and social creatures. He even found a website dedicated to building the perfect duck pond. The more he learned, the more excited he became. This wasn't just about getting back at the HOA. It was about creating something unique and beautiful. It was about turning a negative situation into a positive one. It was about embracing the absurd and having a little fun. He looked at Mary, his face beaming. "This is going to be amazing," he said. "Just wait and see. This is going to be the best duck pond Harmony Glade has ever seen." And with that, Bob embarked on his quackiest adventure yet. An adventure that would test his patience, challenge the HOA, and transform his pool into something truly special. An adventure that would begin with a simple question: How do you turn a swimming pool into a duck pond? Bob spent the next few days immersed in the world of ducks. He devoured articles, watched documentaries, and joined online forums dedicated to duck care. He learned about everything from duck breeds and their dietary needs to the best ways to protect them from predators. He discovered that there was a lot more to ducks than he had ever imagined. He learned that not all ducks are the same. There were mallards, with their distinctive green heads, pecans, known for their fluffy white feathers, and Indian runners, which stood upright like little penguins. Each breed had its own unique personality and characteristics. He also learned about the importance of providing a safe and healthy habitat for ducks. They needed clean water, plenty of space to swim and waddle, and access to a balanced diet. He discovered that certain plants were toxic to ducks, while others were beneficial. He even learned how to build a proper duck house to protect them from the elements. One of his biggest concerns was the chlorine in the pool water. He knew that chlorine could be harmful to ducks, so he researched ways to neutralize it. He found a special chemical that could remove the chlorine without harming the ducks or the environment. He also learned about the importance of maintaining the proper pH balance in the water. He discovered that ducks needed a varied diet to stay healthy. They couldn't just eat bread, as he had always assumed. They needed a combination of grains, vegetables, and protein. He found a local farm supply store that sold specialized duck feed, a mix of nutritious ingredients designed to meet all their dietary needs. He also learned about the potential dangers that ducks faced, such as predators like foxes, raccoons, and even birds of prey. He realized that he would need to take steps to protect his ducks from these threats. He considered building a fence around the pool area and installing a motion-activated sprinkler system to scare away any unwanted visitors. As he delved deeper into the world of ducks, Bob realized that this was more than just a way to get back at the HOA. This was a real responsibility. He was going to be caring for living creatures, and he wanted to do it right. He wanted to create a safe and happy home for his ducks, a place where they could thrive and be themselves. He spent hours sketching out plans for his duck pond, incorporating all the knowledge he had gained. He envisioned a lush, green oasis, filled with plants, rocks, and happy, waddling ducks. He imagined Mrs. Higgins peering over the fence, not with disapproval, but with envy. He knew that this was going to be a lot of work, but he was ready for the challenge. He was determined to create the best duck pond in Harmony Glade, a place that would not only make the HOA look foolish but would also bring joy to his life and the lives of his new feathered friends. He just hoped Mary was ready for the influx of duck-related paraphernalia that was about to take over their house. The duck food alone took up half the garage. With his newfound knowledge, Bob began the transformation. The first step was cleaning the pool. He drained the water, carefully using a pump to avoid flooding his yard or his neighbors. Then, he scrubbed the sides and bottom of the pool with a special cleaner designed to remove any remaining chlorine residue. He rinsed everything thoroughly, making sure no harmful chemicals remained. He paid special attention to the pool filter, replacing the old cartridge with a new one designed to remove even the smallest particles. He wanted to ensure that the water was as clean and pure as possible for his future feathered friends. Next, he tackled the landscaping around the pool. He removed any plants that he had learned were toxic to ducks, replacing them with duck-friendly alternatives like water lilies, cattails, and duckweed. He also added some large rocks around the edge of the pool, creating a natural-looking border and providing the ducks with a place to perch and sunbathe. He built a small ramp leading into the pool, making it easy for the ducks to get in and out of the water. He also constructed a floating island in the middle of the pool, providing the ducks with a safe haven and a place to nest. He even added a small waterfall, creating a gentle stream of water that would help to aerate the pool and keep the water fresh. The sound of the waterfall was soothing and relaxing, adding to the overall ambience of the duck pond. As he worked, Mrs. Higgins watched him from across the street, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. She couldn't quite figure out what he was up to, but she knew it couldn't be good. She saw him removing the pool toys, scrubbing the pool, and adding plants and rocks. She muttered to herself, wondering what kind of crazy scheme he was plotting. Bob ignored her. He was too focused on his task to pay her any attention. He was determined to create the perfect duck pond, no matter what Mrs. Higgins or the HOA thought. He worked tirelessly, spending hours each day cleaning, planting, and building. He consulted with local experts, seeking advice on everything from water quality to duck care. He was determined to do everything right, to create a safe and happy home for his ducks. Finally, after days of hard work, the pool was ready. The water was crystal clear, the plants were thriving, and the rocks were perfectly positioned. The floating island bobbed gently in the water, waiting for its first occupants. The waterfall cascaded down the rocks, creating a soothing melody. Bob stood back and admired his handiwork. He had transformed his pool from a sterile, chlorine-filled rectangle into a lush, natural oasis. He had created a haven for ducks, a place where they could swim, waddle, and be themselves. He had turned his backyard into a paradise. Now, all that was left was to add the ducks. And that's when the real fun would begin. He could almost hear Mrs. Higgins' indignant squawk already. The day finally arrived. Bob had arranged to pick up 3 ducklings from a local farm. He drove out early in the morning, his heart filled with anticipation. When he arrived, he was greeted by a chorus of quacks and waddles. The farmer led him to a pen filled with fluffy yellow ducklings, their tiny beaks peeping and their little feet patting softly on the ground. Bob carefully selected 3 ducklings, choosing 1 pekin, 1 mallard, and 1 Indian runner. He gently placed them in a cardboard box lined with soft straw, making sure they were comfortable and secure for the ride home. As he drove back, he imagined their reactions to their new home. He couldn't wait to see them splashing and playing in the water, exploring their new surroundings. When he arrived home, Mary was waiting for him, her eyes wide with excitement. "They're here," she exclaimed. "Let me see them." Bob carefully lifted the box out of the car and carried it to the pool. He placed it gently on the ground and opened the lid. The ducklings peered out, their bright eyes blinking in the sunlight. He reached into the box and gently scooped up the pekin duckling. It was soft and fluffy, and it quacked softly in his hand. He carefully placed it near the edge of the pool. The duckling hesitated for a moment, then waddled towards the water. It dipped its beak into the water, then hopped in with a splash. The other 2 ducklings followed suit, eagerly jumping into the pool. They paddled around, exploring their new home, their little tails wagging with delight. They dove under the water, chasing after imaginary fish, and they bobbed to the surface, shaking their heads and quacking with joy. Bob and Mary watched them, their faces beaming with happiness. The ducklings were clearly enjoying their new home. They were swimming, diving, and playing, just as Bob had imagined. "They love it," Mary said, clapping her hands with glee. "This is the best idea you've ever had, Bob." Bob smiled. "I told you it would work," he said. "Now, all we need are names." They spent the next few minutes trying to come up with the perfect names for their new feathered friends. Finally, they settled on Quackers for the pekin, Ducky for the mallard, and Legs for the Indian runner, because of its unusual upright stance. Quackers, Ducky, and Legs. The 3 new residents of Bob's backyard paradise. The 3 little ducks who were about to turn the Harmony Glade Homeowners Association upside down. And Mrs. Higgins? Well, she was about to have a bird. A very loud, very quacky bird. Or 3. The next morning, Bob woke up early, eager to see his ducks. He peeked out the window and saw them swimming peacefully in the pool, their little heads bobbing in the water. He smiled. It was going to be a good day. Until the HOA got involved, anyway. He just knew it. It didn't take long. Just one day. One glorious, quack-filled day. That's all it took for the HOA to react. The next morning, another letter arrived. This one was different. It wasn't yellow, and it wasn't white. It was a shade of beige that screamed official business. Bob knew, even before he opened it, that this was going to be a doozy. He ripped open the envelope and scanned the letter. The heading read, in bold, underlined letters, "Notice of violation, immediate action required." The violation? Unauthorized livestock. Bob burst out laughing. Unauthorized livestock? Were they serious? He read on, his laughter quickly turning to disbelief. The letter stated that keeping livestock within the Harmony Glade community was strictly prohibited, citing Regulation 7.2 subsection C, which defined livestock as any animal kept for agricultural purposes, including but not limited to cows, pigs, chickens, and ducks. Ducks. They considered ducks livestock. Bob couldn't believe it. He had expected them to complain about something, but this was beyond absurd. He ran outside and looked at his ducks, swimming peacefully in their pond. They looked nothing like livestock. They looked like, well, ducks. He stormed across the street to Mrs. Higgins' house. He knocked on the door, his anger barely contained. Mrs. Higgins opened the door, a smug look on her face. "Yes, Bob," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Livestock?" Bob exclaimed, waving the letter in her face. "You think my ducks are livestock?" Mrs. Higgins shrugged. "The rules are the rules, Bob. And the rules clearly state that livestock is prohibited. But they're ducks, Mrs. Higgins. Ducks. They're not cows or pigs. They're just ducks. They're still animals, Bob," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice rising. "And they're creating a nuisance. I can hear them quacking all day long. It's disturbing the peace." "Disturbing the peace?" Bob said, his voice incredulous. "They're ducks, Mrs. Higgins. They quack. That's what they do." "Well, they can't quack here," Mrs. Higgins said, slamming the door in his face. Bob stood there for a moment, stunned. He couldn't believe how unreasonable she was being. He knew he had to fight back, but how? He couldn't reason with Mrs. Higgins, and he doubted the rest of the HOA committee would be any more understanding. He went back inside and showed the letter to Mary. She read it, then shook her head in disbelief. "Livestock? That's ridiculous." "I know," Bob said, pacing back and forth. "What am I going to do, Mary? I can't get rid of the ducks. They're part of the family now." "Well, we're not paying another fine," Mary said, her voice firm. "We have to fight this, Bob. But we have to be smart about it." Bob knew she was right. He couldn't just lose his temper and start shouting. He needed a plan. A clever plan. A plan that would expose the HOA's absurdity and allow him to keep his ducks. He needed to prove that ducks were not livestock. He needed to consult a lawyer. No, that was too expensive. He needed to start a petition. Maybe. But first, he needed to find out exactly what the HOA considered agricultural purposes. And he had a feeling that was going to be another wild goose chase. Or, in this case, a wild duck chase. Bob decided to take his fight directly to the HOA. He requested a meeting with the committee, determined to argue his case and expose the absurdity of their livestock classification. He spent hours preparing his arguments, researching the definition of livestock and gathering evidence to support his claim that ducks were not, in fact, livestock. He learned that the legal definition of livestock generally referred to animals raised for commercial purposes, such as meat, milk, or eggs. His ducks, he argued, were not being raised for any such purpose. They were simply pets, companions, backyard ornaments, if you will. He also researched the history of ducks and their relationship with humans. He discovered that ducks had been domesticated for centuries, often kept as pets or for ornamental purposes. He found countless examples of ducks being kept in backyard ponds and gardens, without being considered livestock. He prepared a slideshow presentation, complete with pictures of quackers, ducky, and legs swimming happily in their pond. He included images of other backyard duck ponds, demonstrating that his situation was not unique or unusual. He even found a picture of Queen Elizabeth II feeding ducks in a palace garden. When the day of the meeting arrived, Bob was nervous but determined. He walked into the HOA meeting room, carrying his laptop and his slideshow presentation. The room was filled with the members of the HOA committee, including Mrs. Higgins, who sat at the head of the table, her arms crossed and her face set in a disapproving frown. Bob began his presentation, calmly and respectfully outlining his arguments. He explained the legal definition of livestock, emphasizing that his ducks were not being raised for commercial purposes. He presented his research on the history of ducks and their relationship with humans. He showed his slideshow presentation, highlighting the beauty and tranquility of his duck pond. He pointed out the absurdity of classifying his ducks as livestock, arguing that they were no different from any other pet, such as a dog or a cat. He challenged the HOA to explain how his ducks were harming the community or violating any reasonable rules. "These ducks are not livestock," Bob said, his voice rising with passion. "They are pets. They are companions. They bring joy and beauty to my backyard. They are not causing any harm to anyone. In fact, they are probably the most well-behaved residents of Harmony Glade." He paused, looking at the members of the committee. "You can't seriously believe that these ducks are a threat to the community. You can't seriously believe that they are livestock. This is ridiculous. This is absurd. And it's time to stop this nonsense and let me keep my ducks." He sat down, his heart pounding in his chest. He had said his piece. Now, it was up to the HOA to decide. He looked at Mrs. Higgins, but her face remained impassive. He had a feeling that this was going to be a long and difficult battle. But he was ready to fight. He was ready to defend his ducks. He was ready to expose the HOA's absurdity. He just hoped they were ready for what was coming. Because Bob was just getting started. The HOA committee, predictably, remained unmoved by Bob's presentation. Mrs. Higgins, in particular, was adamant that the rules were the rules and that Bob's ducks had to go. The committee voted to uphold the violation notice, giving Bob 30 days to remove the unauthorized livestock from his property. Bob was devastated, but he refused to give up. He knew he had to find a way to fight back. He talked to Mary, and they decided to take their story to the local news. They contacted a reporter at the Harmony Glade Gazette, explaining their situation and highlighting the absurdity of the HOA's rules. The reporter, a young woman named Sarah, was immediately intrigued by the story. She came to Bob's house to interview him and see the duck pond for herself. She was charmed by quackers, ducky, and legs, and she was appalled by the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. Sarah wrote a story about Bob's duck pond dilemma, highlighting the absurdity of the HOA's rules and the unfairness of their treatment of Bob. She interviewed Bob, Mary, and even a few of Bob's neighbors, who expressed their support for his duck pond. The story was published on the front page of the Harmony Glade Gazette, and it quickly went viral. People from all over town, and even from other parts of the state, were sharing the story on social media, expressing their outrage at the HOA's actions. Suddenly, Bob's backyard became a local attraction. Neighbors and strangers alike came to see the duck pond for themselves, marveling at its beauty and cheering Bob on in his fight against the HOA. Children brought bags of bread to feed the ducks, and adults took selfies with quackers, ducky, and legs. Reporters from other news outlets, including the local television station, came to Bob's house to interview him and film the duck pond. Bob became a local celebrity, known as the Duck Pond Guy. The HOA, meanwhile, was not happy. They were furious that Bob had taken their dispute public, and they were embarrassed by the negative attention they were receiving. Mrs. Higgins, in particular, was livid. She couldn't believe that Bob had turned her into a laughingstock. The HOA committee held an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. They realized that they had a public relations disaster on their hands. They knew they had to do something to salvage their reputation. But what could they do? They couldn't just back down and let Bob keep his ducks. That would set a bad precedent and encourage other homeowners to break the rules. But they couldn't continue to fight Bob, either. That would only make them look even more unreasonable and out of touch. They were stuck between a rock and a hard place. And Bob, with his duck pond and his newfound fame, was enjoying every minute of it. He knew that he had the upper hand. He had the support of the community, and he had the media on his side. Now, all he had to do was wait for the HOA to make their next move. And he had a feeling it was going to be a good one. Or, at least, a very interesting one. The phone was ringing off the hook, and Bob was now doing interviews with national news. The constant media attention and the overwhelming public support for Bob's duck pond had finally taken its toll on the HOA. They were embarrassed, humiliated, and desperate to put an end to the duck pond debacle, as it was now being called in the local news. The HOA president, a mild-mannered accountant named Mr. Peterson, contacted Bob and requested a meeting. He explained that the HOA was willing to negotiate a compromise, hoping to find a solution that would satisfy both parties and restore some semblance of peace to Harmony Glade. Bob was cautiously optimistic. He knew that the HOA was only negotiating because they were under pressure, but he was willing to listen to what they had to say. He agreed to meet with Mr. Peterson and a few other members of the HOA committee, but he insisted on having Mary present as well. The meeting was held in a neutral location, a small conference room at the local library. Mr. Peterson started by apologizing for the HOA's handling of the situation. He admitted that the livestock classification was perhaps a bit extreme and that they were willing to reconsider their position. He proposed a compromise. Bob could keep his ducks, but he would have to agree to certain restrictions. He would have to build a fence around the duck pond to contain the ducks and prevent them from wandering onto other properties. He would also have to agree to clean up after the ducks regularly to prevent any unpleasant odors. And, of course, he would have to agree not to add any more ducks to the pond. Bob listened carefully to Mr. Peterson's proposal. He was relieved that the HOA was willing to back down, but he wasn't entirely satisfied with their offer. He felt that the restrictions were too limiting and that they were still treating him unfairly. He countered with his own proposal. He would agree to build a fence around the duck pond, but he wanted the HOA to publicly acknowledge that ducks were not livestock. He also wanted the HOA to donate a sum of money to a local wildlife rescue organization as a gesture of goodwill. And, of course, he wanted the HOA to drop the fine for excessive splashing. Mr. Peterson and the other HOA members were taken aback by Bob's demands. They hadn't expected him to be so assertive. They huddled together to discuss his proposal, whispering and gesturing animatedly. Finally, Mr. Peterson turned to Bob and said, "We need some time to consider your proposal. We'll get back to you in a few days." Bob nodded. He knew that the HOA was still hesitant to give him everything he wanted, but he was confident that they would eventually come around. He had the upper hand, and he wasn't afraid to use it. As he left the library, he smiled. He had a feeling that he was about to win his battle with the HOA. And when he did, he was going to celebrate by throwing a duck pond party, complete with duck-shaped balloons, duck-themed snacks, and, of course, plenty of quacking. He just hoped Mrs. Higgins wouldn't try to crash the party. Although, he had to admit, it would be kind of funny to see her wearing a duck costume. He chuckled at the thought. The HOA was about to learn that you don't mess with a man and his ducks. Especially when that man has the entire town on his side. A few days later, Mr. Peterson called Bob with the HOA's response. They were willing to meet him halfway. They would publicly acknowledge that ducks were not typically considered livestock, but they couldn't donate money to the wildlife rescue organization. Instead, they proposed creating a new, Harmony Glade Wildlife Fund, to support local animal welfare initiatives. They would also drop the fine for excessive splashing. Bob considered their offer carefully. He realized that he couldn't get everything he wanted, and he didn't want to be unreasonable. He decided that the HOA's proposal was a fair compromise, one that would benefit everyone, including the ducks. He agreed to work with the HOA to finalize the details of the agreement. He met with Mr. Peterson and a few other members of the committee, and they worked together to draft a new set of rules regarding backyard ponds and animal welfare. They agreed that homeowners would be allowed to keep ducks, as long as they followed certain guidelines. They would have to build a fence around their ponds, keep the area clean and sanitary, and ensure that the ducks were properly cared for. They would also have to agree to limit the number of ducks to a reasonable amount. Bob was pleased with the outcome. He had not only saved his ducks, but he had also helped to create a more tolerant and compassionate community. He had shown the HOA that it was possible to find common ground, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable differences. He and Mary celebrated their victory by throwing a small party for their neighbors. They set up a table with duck-shaped cookies and lemonade, and they invited everyone to come and see Quackers, Ducky, and Legs. Even Mrs. Higgins showed up, though she kept her distance from the ducks. Bob made a short speech, thanking everyone for their support and emphasizing the importance of community and compromise. He raised a glass of lemonade and toasted to a brighter future for Harmony Glade, a future where ducks and humans could live together in peace and harmony. The duck pond continued to be a popular attraction in the neighborhood. Children loved to visit Quackers, Ducky, and Legs, and adults often stopped by to admire the peaceful scene. Bob became known as the Duck Pond Ambassador, a title he wore with pride. He learned a valuable lesson from his experience with the HOA, that it was always possible to find common ground, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable differences. He learned that compromise was essential for building a strong and resilient community. And he learned that sometimes, all it takes to change the world is a little bit of quacking. He and Mary even started volunteering at the local wildlife rescue, inspired by their duck pond adventure. The ducks had brought unexpected joy and purpose to their lives. But the story doesn't end there. Bob's experience with the HOA inspired him to run for a position on the committee himself. He felt that he could bring a fresh perspective and help to create rules that were fair, reasonable, and beneficial to the entire community. He campaigned tirelessly, knocking on doors, attending neighborhood events, and sharing his vision for a better Harmony Glade. He promised to work with his fellow committee members to revise the outdated pool rules and create a more welcoming environment for all residents. To everyone's surprise, including his own, Bob won the election. He was now a member of the very organization that had once tried to fine him for splashing and classify his ducks as livestock. One of his first priorities was to address the pool rules. He worked with the other committee members to create a new set of regulations that were both reasonable and enforceable. They eliminated the absurd restrictions on splashing and pool toys, replacing them with common-sense guidelines that focused on safety and cleanliness. They also created a new Pool Fun Committee, to organize pool parties and activities for residents of all ages. Bob volunteered to be the chairman of the committee, and he organized a series of successful events that brought the community together and fostered a sense of camaraderie. As for the duck pond, Bob realized that it was taking up a lot of space in his backyard, and he missed being able to swim in his pool. He came up with a solution that would benefit both him and the ducks. He decided to build a smaller, separate pond area just for Quackers, Ducky, and Legs. He hired a landscaper to create a beautiful, natural-looking pond in a corner of his yard. The pond was smaller than the pool, but it was still large enough for the ducks to swim and play comfortably. It was surrounded by lush plants and rocks, creating a peaceful and serene environment. With the ducks safely relocated to their new pond, Bob was finally able to reopen his pool for swimming. He drained the water, cleaned it thoroughly, and refilled it with fresh, sparkling water. He invited his friends and neighbors over for a pool party, celebrating the end of the duck pond debacle and the beginning of a new era of harmony in Harmony Glade. And so, Bob's story came to a happy ending. He had fought for his rights, he had stood up to the HOA, and he had created a more tolerant and compassionate community. He had learned the importance of compromise, the power of communication, and the value of a good sense of humor. And he had learned that sometimes, all it takes to change the world is a little bit of quacking, a lot of determination, and a willingness to turn a swimming pool into a duck pond. And, of course, a healthy dose of common sense. As for Mrs. Higgins, she eventually came around, even admitting that she enjoyed watching the ducks waddle around in their pond. She even started bringing them bread crumbs, though she always made sure to keep her distance. The end.